There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the plain clothes of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the familiar weight of a friend leaning against you on a sofa. You don't recognize them as architects of your future. They are simply moments, passing through time like any other. It is only in looking back, from the vantage point of a future they have irrevocably shaped, that you see them for what they were. The turning of a key in a lock you never knew was there. The first tremor of an earthquake that would redesign your entire internal landscape. For me, that moment smelled like old books and rain-soaked cotton, and it felt like the impossibly slow rhythm of Leo's breathing against my collarbone. He was asleep, utterly boneless and heavy in a way that spoke of a trust so profound it terrified me. The television murmured on, casting shifting blue light across his face, and in that silent, borrowed time, I was caught in the terrifying space between a prayer and a confession, unable to move for fear of waking him, and more afraid of the moment he would eventually have to wake up. It was a fragile ecosystem, this thing we had built in the months since his world had fractured. It was a terrarium of unspoken rules and careful gestures, all contained within the glass walls of my small apartment. Here, he could be broken, and I could be the one to hold the pieces. The unspoken agreement was that I would not ask what the pieces meant, and he would not have to explain why he kept giving them to me. He was simply seeking harbor from a storm, and I, it seemed, had become his only port. But a harbor is not a home. A harbor is a temporary refuge, a place to repair and refuel before heading back out to the open sea. I knew this. I understood the geography of temporary things. My life as a photographer was built on capturing them, on freezing a fleeting expression or a transient slant of light. I knew that nothing lasts. And yet, as his hand twitched in his sleep, his fingers curling loosely around the fabric of my shirt, I felt a dangerous, geological shift inside me. A hope, stubborn and foolish as a weed growing through concrete, began to take root. It was the hope that maybe, just maybe, this time was different. Maybe this harbor could be a place to drop anchor for good. It was a thought so perilous that I barely let myself think it, yet it existed, a warm, glowing ember in the otherwise cool, dark chamber of my chest. I had known Leo for nearly a decade, and for almost all of that time, my love for him had been a secret, a perfectly preserved fossil I kept hidden away. We met in a sophomore-level structural engineering class, a prerequisite I was taking for an architecture minor I would later abandon. I was the quiet one in the back, filling my notebooks with sketches of light and shadow instead of stress-strained curves. He was the one in the front row, a supernova of easy confidence and restless energy, always asking the questions everyone else was too timid to voice. He moved through the world as if it were a space designed specifically for him, all broad shoulders and a laugh that could fill any room. I, on the other hand, felt like I was perpetually trying to find the right aperture, letting in just enough light to see without ever being fully seen myself. Our friendship shouldn't have worked. We were opposing forces. He was kinetic energy. I was potential. He was loud, primary colors. I was the subtle gradient of a twilight sky. But he sought me out. I was studying in the library one afternoon, trying to make sense of cantilever beams, when his shadow fell across my textbook. He'd smiled, a brilliant, disarming thing, and asked if I understood any of it, because he was, in his words, completely and utterly lost. We spent the next 4 hours huddled over diagrams, his knee occasionally brushing against mine under the small table, sending a jolt through my system that had absolutely nothing to do with static electricity. He explained the math with a surprising clarity, and I, in turn, helped him visualize the forces, drawing bridges and arches in the margins of his notes. By the end of the night, we had a study group of 2, and by the end of the semester, we had a friendship that felt as solid and dependable as the structures we were supposed to be learning about. I knew, almost from the beginning, that my feelings for him were a different category of architecture altogether. They were not the sturdy, well-planned foundations of our friendship, but something more like a hidden room, a secret annex I was building onto my own heart, accessible only to me. It happened one evening in our junior year. We were walking back from a late movie, the campus hushed, and sleeping under a dome of stars. A sudden, unseasonable chill had descended, and I'd shoved my hands deep into my pockets. Without a word, Leo had unzipped his own jacket, pulled my hand out of my pocket, and tucked it into the space between his arm and his side, zipping the jacket back up to trap my hand against the warmth of his ribs. It was a casual, thoughtless gesture of friendly care, nothing more. But for me, the feeling of his warmth, the steady beat of his heart, so close to my fingertips, was a revelation. It was the moment the fossil came to life. The moment I knew I was in trouble. He started dating Sarah a few months later. She was perfect for him, in all the ways I was not. She was bright and bubbly, a marketing major with a smile as wide and welcoming as his. They were a match set, a perfect pair. I became the third point of their triangle, the best friend, the confidant, the official unofficial photographer for all their major life events. I took their graduation photos, their first anniversary pictures, the photos of the new apartment they moved into together. I learned to frame them in my viewfinder, to see their happiness as its own self-contained composition, a thing of beauty that I could appreciate from a distance. I developed a masterful skill for emotional cropping, cutting my own yearning out of the frame, leaving only the clean, sharp lines of a supportive friend. I told myself it was enough. For years, it was. Watching him happy, even if it wasn't with me, felt like a noble and sufficient purpose. I built the walls of my hidden room thicker, soundproofed them, and learned to live with the quiet echo of my own heart inside. The phone call came on a Thursday in October. The rain was lashing against my studio window, blurring the city lights into a watercolor wash. I was in my darkroom, the faint, acidic smell of fixer in the air, watching an image of a lone, skeletal tree emerge on a sheet of paper submerged in the developer tray. My phone buzzed on the counter, a harsh, intrusive sound in the sacred quiet. I almost ignored it, but I saw Leo's name flash on the screen. He never called on weeknights unless it was important. I wiped my hands and answered, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Julian. His voice was a ghost of itself. It was thin, frayed, stripped of all its usual warmth and resonance. It sounded like a recording played on a dying battery. Leo? What's wrong? Are you okay? There was a long silence on the other end, filled only with a ragged, unsteady breath. I could picture him perfectly, standing in the middle of his living room, the one I had helped him paint, phone pressed to his ear, his other hand running distractedly through his hair. He did that when he was stressed, a gesture so familiar it was like a part of my own muscle memory. It's over, he finally whispered. Sarah and me. It's over. The words landed in the quiet of my darkroom with the force of a physical blow. Over. A simple word for such a catastrophic event. It was the end of an era, the collapse of a structure I had come to see as a permanent part of my world skyline. My first thought, a shameful and selfish one that I immediately pushed down, was a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. My second, overpowering thought was of him, of the raw, undisguised pain in that single, whispered word. Where are you? I asked, my voice steady, practical. Stay where you are. I'm coming over. I didn't wait for an answer. I switched off the safe light, plunging the room into blackness, and left the photograph of the lonely tree floating in its chemical bath, half-formed and forgotten. The shift was not immediate. It was a slow, almost imperceptible change in the climate of our friendship. In the beginning, in the raw, immediate aftermath of the breakup, my role was simple. I was a quiet presence. I brought over groceries he wouldn't eat and put on movies he wouldn't watch. I sat with him on his sofa, the one he and Sarah had picked out together, and listened to the silence, which was thick with the ghosts of conversations and laughter. He didn't talk about it much, not at first. He spoke in fragments, sharing memories like broken shards of glass, each one sharp and dangerous. I learned to just listen, to not offer platitudes or solutions, but to simply be a vessel for his grief. I became an expert in the art of being there, of occupying space beside him without demanding anything in return. He couldn't stand being in their apartment. His own home had become a museum of a life that was no longer his. Every object held a memory, every room an echo. After a week of watching him pace the floors like a caged animal, I made the offer. Come stay with me for a while, I said one night, as we stared at the muted television. My couch isn't the most comfortable thing in the world, but at least it doesn't have ghosts. He looked at me, his eyes hollowed out and shadowed with exhaustion. He just nodded, a small, defeated gesture. That night, he packed a duffel bag and came back to my apartment. He fell asleep on the couch almost instantly, fully clothed, as if the sheer weight of his sadness had finally dragged him under. I remember pulling a blanket over him, my hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before I smoothed it over his shoulder. It was the first time in a long time I had touched him with such deliberate care, and the boundary between friend and something more felt thin and porous, like a sheet of rice paper. Thus began the era of the couch. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom with a living room that doubled as my office and dining area. The couch became his territory. At first, he kept to it, a small island in the sea of my living space. He would wake up before me and be gone to work, and I would come home to find him already there, staring into space. The evenings fell into a pattern. I would cook, he would pick at his food, and then we would migrate to the couch to watch something, anything, to fill the silence. We started with action movies, loud and explosive things that required no emotional investment. They were pure noise, a welcome distraction from the deafening quiet of his own thoughts. The geography of the couch began its slow and subtle transformation. Initially, we maintained a respectable distance, a full cushion of neutral territory between us. He would sit on one end, legs drawn up, and I on the other, a book or my laptop serving as a convenient barricade. Then, one night, exhausted from a long day of fielding calls from his consulting clients, he stretched out, his socked feet resting on the cushion next to my hip. He apologized immediately, starting to pull them back, but I waved it off. "It's fine," I said, not looking up from my laptop. "I don't mind." It was not fine. It was a 5-alarm fire. My entire nervous system was suddenly focused on the innocuous pressure of his feet near my leg. I could feel the warmth of them through the denim of my jeans. It was a tiny, insignificant breach of our unspoken perimeter, but it felt momentous. My mind, the ever-diligent photographer, started documenting the moment, cataloging the sensory data, trying to develop its meaning. Was it just comfort? A thoughtless act of a man in his own temporary home? Or was it something else? A test? An invitation? I spent the rest of the movie in a state of hyper-awareness, my thoughts racing, my body perfectly still. The ritual evolved from there, glacially at first, then with increasing speed. The feet on the cushion became a regular occurrence. Then came the night he fell asleep, his head slumping sideways until it came to rest against my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. I held my breath, listening to the soft puff of his exhales against the collar of my shirt. He smelled faintly of the soap from my shower, and something uniquely his own, a scent I'd known for years but had never been this close to. This immersed in. I sat there for over an hour, my shoulder aching, my heart hammering a frantic, silent rhythm against my ribs, until the movie's credits rolled and I had to gently nudge him awake. He mumbled an apology, his voice thick with sleep, and stumbled off to my bedroom, where I'd insisted he take the bed while I took the couch. The next morning, neither of us mentioned it. It became another unspoken thing, a moment absorbed into the fabric of our new reality, filed away in the vast, expanding archive of my secret hope. The door was part of it, too. He started leaving my bedroom door ajar at night. Not wide open, but just cracked enough that a sliver of the hallway light cut across the floor. I didn't know what to make of it. My logical mind told me it was nothing, that he was simply a person who didn't like sleeping in a completely closed-off space. But the other part of my mind, the part that lived in the secret room of my heart, saw it as a symbol, a threshold intentionally left open, a boundary line made permeable. I would lie on the couch in the darkness, long after he'd gone to bed, and I would stare at that thin blade of light, and I would wonder. I would build entire architectural theories around it, designing blueprints of meaning and intention. It was a form of self-torture, this constant analysis, but I couldn't stop. Every ambiguous gesture he made was a clue, a breadcrumb, and I was starving, following the trail with a desperate, all-consuming focus, unsure if it was leading me toward a home or off the edge of a cliff. The apex of the ritual, the moment it solidified into something undeniable and terrifyingly intimate, happened about 2 months into his stay. We were watching some quiet, atmospheric film, a choice that felt like a progression from the mindless explosions of the early weeks. The weather had turned cold, a deep, biting winter chill that seeped through the old windows of my apartment. I had a thick wool blanket spread over both of us as we sat on the couch. He was quiet beside me, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. It wasn't the hollowed-out silence of grief, but something softer, more contemplative. Halfway through the film, without any warning, he shifted, turning toward me and laying his head not on my shoulder, but directly in my lap. The world stopped. I froze, my hands hovering in the air for a second before I let them rest on the arm of the couch. He adjusted himself, nuzzling his face into the fabric of my jeans and letting out a long, slow sigh, as if he had been holding his breath for months and was finally letting it go. His hair was soft under my chin. I could feel the warmth of his scalp, the rise and fall of his shoulders with each breath. The movie played on, the characters on screen speaking words I could no longer hear, their faces just moving shapes in the periphery. My entire universe had contracted to the space he occupied, to the solid, living weight of him in my lap. This was not a mistake. This was not an accidental slump of an exhausted body. This was a choice, a deliberate act of surrender. He was placing himself in my care, in my hands, in the most vulnerable way imaginable. And my mind, my overactive, analytical mind, finally fell silent. There were no more theories, no more blueprints. There was only the profound, overwhelming reality of him, right there. I slowly, tentatively, lifted one of my hands from the armrest and placed it on his back, between his shoulder blades. I felt the muscles there relax under my palm. He shifted again, a small, contented sound in his throat, and settled even more deeply. My heart, which had been a frantic bird beating against my ribs, slowly calmed, its rhythm synchronizing with the slow, steady measure of his breathing. We stayed like that for the rest of the film, and for a long time after it ended, sitting in the quiet darkness, cocooned under the blanket. In that moment, the line between us dissolved completely. There was no harbor and no ship, no observer and no subject. There was only us, two people, finding warmth in a cold world, in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. This became our new normal. The couch was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was our space, a sanctuary defined by this new, unspoken intimacy. Most nights ended this way, with him curled up, his head in my lap or tucked against my chest, his arm thrown loosely over my waist. I learned the specific weight of his sleeping body, the way his breathing would deepen when he was truly lost to the world. I became a scholar of his smallest gestures. I could tell by the tension in his shoulders if he'd had a bad day at work, or by the way he sought my physical presence if he was feeling particularly lost or lonely. It was a language spoken without words, a conversation conducted through proximity and touch, and I had become fluent in it. But it existed in a bubble. In the mornings, when the sun streamed in and the practicalities of the day began, the spell would be broken. We would untangle ourselves with a quiet carefulness, a slight awkwardness coloring our movements. He would thank me for the bed. I would thank him for making the coffee, and we would move around each other in the small kitchen with the practiced ease of old friends, the profound intimacy of the night before packed away like a secret. It was a strange and dizzying duality. By night, we were something akin to lovers, sharing a level of physical closeness I had only ever dreamed of. By day, we were just Julian and Leo, best friends, roommates by circumstance. I was living in a state of suspended disbelief, caught in the liminal space between what was real and what I desperately wanted to be real. I was terrified to break the spell, to ask the question that hung in the air between us. What is this? To name it felt like it would shatter it. So I said nothing. I existed in the quiet ritual, hoarding the moments of closeness like a dragon hoarding gold, living for the nights when the world would fall away and it would be just us, the glow of the television, and the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart. The breaking point, the moment the bubble finally burst, came on a Friday night. It had been a particularly grueling week for him. A major project at his firm had gone sideways, and he had been working punishingly long hours, fueled by caffeine and stress. He came home looking utterly defeated, his face pale and drawn. He dropped his bag by the door, bypassed the kitchen entirely, and just collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in a cushion with a groan. I sat down next to him, placing a hand on his back. "Tough one?" I asked softly. He nodded into the cushion, not moving. The worst. I didn't press him for details. I just sat there, my hand a steady weight on his back, offering what little comfort I could. After a few minutes, he rolled over, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. He looked at me, a raw, unguarded vulnerability in his gaze that made my chest ache. He didn't say anything. He just reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, a touch so light it was barely there. It was the first time he had ever touched my face. My breath hitched in my throat. The air grew thick, charged with all the unspoken things from the past few months. The room felt impossibly small, the silence deafening. He searched my eyes, his own filled with 1,000 questions. His thumb stroked my cheek, a slow, contemplative gesture. The distance between us, which had been shrinking for months, suddenly felt like a chasm he was preparing to cross. The world narrowed to the few inches between our faces. I could see the faint flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the slight tremble in his lower lip. Time seemed to stretch and thin, becoming elastic. He whispered my name, his voice raspy. Julian. Yeah. I breathed, my own voice barely audible. His eyes flickered down to my lips, and then back up to meet mine. A silent question was asked, a silent permission sought. And in that moment, I knew I could no longer live in the gray area. I could no longer subsist on ambiguous gestures and plausible deniability. I needed to know. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. That was all it took. He leaned in, closing the final distance between us. His lips met mine with a hesitant, questioning softness. It was not a kiss of passion or demand, but one of profound, searching tenderness. It was a confession. It was an apology. It was a question. It was the sound of a key finally turning in a lock. It was gentle and uncertain, his hand still cupping my face as if he were holding something impossibly fragile. I closed my eyes, my own hand coming up to rest on his wrist, and for the first time in 10 years, I let myself hope without reservation. The kiss was brief, a mere whisper of contact, but it redrew the entire map of my world. When he pulled back, he didn't move far. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. We stayed like that, breathing the same air, the silence no longer empty, but filled with the resounding echo of what had just happened. The crossing had been made. We were on the other side of the river now, and I had no idea what this new country would look like. The morning was a landscape of quiet devastation. I woke on the couch, the gray light of dawn filtering through the blinds, a cold blanket tangled around my legs. The apartment was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the ones we had shared before. This was a hollow, anxious silence. The bedroom door, which had been his silent invitation for months, was firmly closed. It felt like a slammed door, a final, definitive statement. I knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in my gut, that he was gone. I got up and walked to the kitchen. A single, folded piece of paper sat on the counter. His handwriting, usually a confident scrawl, was tight and shaky. Jules. I'm so sorry. Last night was a mistake. I was a mess. I can't do this. I'll get my stuff later. Leo. I read the note 3 times, as if staring at the words long enough would change their meaning. A mistake. The word was a punch, knocking the air from my lungs. All those nights, all that closeness, all the silent communication I thought we had been building, it was all just a mistake. A byproduct of his grief and my proximity. I had been a comfort object, a warm body in a storm, and I had foolishly, arrogantly, allowed myself to believe it was more. The anger came first, a hot, bitter wave. How could he? How could he initiate that, cross that line with such tenderness, only to retreat and call it a mistake? Then came the shame, hot on its heels. I had been so wrong. I had misread everything, projecting my own decade of longing onto his simple need for a friend. I had built a cathedral of meaning out of a pile of rubble. The apartment felt huge and empty without him. Every corner seemed to mock me with his absence. The dent on the couch cushion where his head used to rest. The coffee mug he favored, sitting clean in the dish rack. The faint scent of his shampoo lingering in the bathroom. He had been a temporary guest, and now he was gone, leaving behind only the ghosts of a future I had allowed myself to imagine. I spent the day in a fog of misery, wandering my own home like a stranger. I pulled out the photograph I had been developing the night he called me, the one of the lone, skeletal tree. I had never finished it. I pinned it up in the darkroom and stared at it. It looked like me. Stripped bare, isolated, weathered by a storm. The conflict was not a loud, dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, agonizing war of attrition waged over text messages and missed calls. He didn't come to get his things. A week passed. Then two. My texts were brief, clinical. When are you coming for your stuff? His replies were evasive, filled with apologies and promises to come by soon. He was avoiding me, and the avoidance was more painful than any argument could have been. He was trying to erase the last few months, to pretend that the couch and the late-night movies and the kiss had never happened. He wanted to rewind time, to put us back into the neat, safe box of best friends, but the box was broken. He had been the one to break it. I couldn't live in that limbo. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I had risked everything on that one silent nod, and he had run. I deserved more than a coward's note and a series of evasive texts. I deserved an explanation. I deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. One evening, after another day of silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out of my apartment, got in my car, and drove to his. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just knew that the silence had to end. He opened the door after the third knock. He looked terrible, worse than he had in the immediate aftermath of his breakup with Sarah. He was unshaven, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was wearing an old, faded university sweatshirt, and for a second, he looked so much like the boy I had first met in that engineering class that it made my heart ache. He didn't seem surprised to see me, just resigned. "Julian," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Can I come in?" I asked. My own voice was surprisingly steady. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, letting me into the apartment that had once been so full of life and now felt as sterile and unwelcoming as a hotel room. Boxes were stacked in one corner, half-packed. He was moving. The realization hit me with another dull thud of pain. He wasn't just leaving my couch. He was leaving the city. "You're leaving," I stated. It wasn't a question. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "My company has an office in Portland. I asked for a transfer. I thought a change of scenery would be good." A change of scenery, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Or an escape route. That finally made him look at me. The defensiveness in his posture was a wall he was hastily erecting between us. "Jules, don't." "Don't what, Leo?" I took a step closer, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts to keep it level. "Don't ask you to be honest with me for once. Don't ask you why you spent 2 months sleeping in my arms and then kissed me like you meant it, only to disappear and call it a mistake. You don't get to do that. You don't get to use me as your emotional life raft and then just cut the rope and sail away when you feel better." Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and unwelcome. I had promised myself I wouldn't cry, but seeing him there, so closed off and distant, seeing the packed boxes, it was all too much. The carefully constructed dam of my composure began to crack. "I needed a friend," he said, his voice low and strained. "And you were there for me. I'm so grateful for that. But I got confused. I was lonely and sad and I leaned on you too much. The kiss, that was just, I don't know. It was a moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything. Don't lie to me," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, hollow sadness. "Please, just don't lie. Not after everything. I can handle the truth. If you don't feel anything for me, just say it. But don't you dare tell me that kiss meant nothing. I was there, Leo. It wasn't nothing." He finally broke. His shoulders slumped, the defensive wall crumbling into dust. He sank onto one of the packed boxes, burying his face in his hands. A choked, ragged sob escaped him. "I don't know what I feel," he whispered into his palms, the words muffled and thick with despair. "That's the honest truth. I don't know. Everything is a mess. My whole life fell apart, and you were the only solid thing left. Being with you, on your couch, in your apartment, it was the only time I felt safe. The only time I didn't feel like I was completely falling apart." He looked up at me then, his eyes swimming with tears, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "And then I kissed you. And for a second, it felt right. It felt more right than anything has in a very long time. And that scared the hell out of me. Because I don't know what it means. I've only ever been with women. I've only ever pictured my life one way. And now you're my best friend. And I've wrecked it. I've wrecked everything." His confession, raw and broken as it was was not the rejection I had braced myself for. It was something far more complicated. It was the terrified admission of a man whose entire map of the world had been rendered obsolete. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. He was running from a feeling he didn't understand and wasn't equipped to deal with. I crossed the room and sat on the floor in front of him. I didn't touch him. I just sat there, closing the physical distance between us, offering my presence one more time. You haven't wrecked everything, I said softly. But you can't run away from this, Leo. You can't just pack a box and move to another state and hope it goes away. It won't. It'll just be there, waiting for you in Portland. I took a deep breath, gathering all my courage. It was time to lay my own cards on the table, to be as honest as I was asking him to be. I'm in love with you, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating as they left my lips. I have been for a very long time. For years. And what happened between us these past few months, for me, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was everything. But I can't be the only one who feels it. I can't build something real on your fear and confusion. So you need to figure it out. You need to stop running and figure out what you actually want. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I'm not going to try and stop you from leaving. That has to be your choice. But before you go, just be honest with yourself. That's all I'm asking. I turned and walked out of his apartment, leaving him sitting amidst the wreckage of his old life and the terrifying, uncertain blueprint of a new one. The door clicked shut behind me, and this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I had said everything that needed to be said. I had laid my heart bare, a vulnerable, beating thing on the floor of his half-empty apartment. There was nothing left for me to do but wait and see if he would pick it up or step over it on his way out of town. I went through the motions of my life. I went to my studio, I developed photos, I ate, I slept. But everything was muted, as if I were living behind a pane of thick glass. I didn't contact him. The ball was in his court. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat, a frantic, hopeful bird. But it was never him. I braced myself for the silence to become permanent. I started to mourn the loss of him, not just as a potential lover, but as the friend who had been the central pillar of my life for a decade. The grief was a physical thing, a constant, dull ache in my chest. I had gambled our friendship on the possibility of something more, and it seemed I had lost everything. I started to accept it. I had to. I began to imagine a life without him in it, a bleak, colorless landscape. Then, on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week after our confrontation, there was a knock on my door. It was a soft, hesitant knock, not his usual confident rap. My heart stopped. I walked to the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. I opened it, and he was there. He wasn't holding a duffel bag this time. He was just standing there, his hands shoved in his pockets, looking nervous and uncertain, but present. He was here. He hadn't run. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quiet. I nodded, stepping aside to let him pass. He walked into the middle of my living room and stood there for a moment, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. His eyes landed on the couch, our couch, and lingered there. He turned to face me. The exhaustion and confusion were gone from his face. In their place was a quiet clarity, a sober resolution that I had never seen in him before. He looked calm. "I unpacked my boxes," he said simply. 3 words. They landed in the quiet room and bloomed, filling the space with a fragile, burgeoning hope. He wasn't leaving. "I've spent the last week doing what you said," he continued, his gaze steady and direct. "I stopped running. I stayed in that empty apartment, and I just thought. About everything. About Sarah. About my life. About you." He took a step closer to me. "You were right. I was scared. I was terrified. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I wanted, it all just dissolved. And the only thing that felt real in all of that chaos was you. Being with you. It wasn't just a safe harbor, Julian. I told myself it was, because that was easier. It was easier to believe I was just using my friend for comfort than to face what was really happening. My breath was trapped in my chest. I could only listen, my entire being focused on his words, on the incredible, unbelievable truth that was unfolding in front of me. "I think," he said, his voice dropping, becoming softer, more intimate. "I think I've been falling in love with you for months. Maybe longer. I just didn't have the language for it. I didn't know what it looked like. It wasn't the loud, bright thing I had with Sarah. It was this quiet, steady, deep thing that grew in the dark. I didn't see it happening until it was already there. And when I finally saw it, when I kissed you and it felt like coming home, I panicked. Because a home is a terrifying thing to a man whose house just burned down. He was standing right in front of me now, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He reached out, not to my face this time, but took both of my hands in his. His grip was firm, sure. I'm still scared, he admitted, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what it's supposed to look like. But I know I don't want to do it without you. I know that when I picture my life now, you're the only thing that's in focus. Everything else is just a blur. He looked at me then, a look of such open, vulnerable, heart-stopping love that it stole the air from my lungs. It was the look I had been secretly hoping to see for 10 years. It was the look that said everything his fumbling, beautiful words were trying to say. He said he didn't know what he felt, and then he looked at me like he finally did. I'm in love with you, Julian, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And if you'll have me, I'd like to learn what it means to build a new home. With you. The tears I had been holding back for weeks finally fell, silent tracks down my face. But they weren't tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of relief, of a profound, bone-deep catharsis. The fossil I had kept hidden for so long was no longer a secret. It was alive and real, and standing right in front of me, holding my hands. I couldn't speak. I just squeezed his hands and nodded, a wave of emotion so powerful it rendered me speechless. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that finally reached his eyes, and he gently pulled me forward, wrapping his arms around me. I buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, and held on tight. The long winter was over. The storm had passed. We were finally, truly home. The new normal was a quiet, deliberate construction. It was not a sudden, dramatic shift into a new life, but a series of small, intentional choices we made every day. We were learning a new language together, a new way of being. We started with the couch. The first night after his confession, we sat there, a movie playing on the screen, and the old, familiar tension was gone. It was replaced by a soft, warm certainty. When he reached for me, pulling me against his side, it was not an act of desperate comfort, but a simple, declarative statement of affection. When I rested my head on his shoulder, it was not with a heart full of anxious questions, but with the quiet peace of belonging. The space was the same, but its architecture had been entirely redesigned. It was no longer a temporary shelter. It was the foundation of our new home. He moved his things into my apartment slowly, piece by piece. There was no rush. We were not trying to build a new life on top of the ruins of his old one. We were starting from scratch. His favorite coffee mug joined mine on the shelf. His books found a place among my photography annuals. His presence began to fill the spaces in my apartment that I never even knew were empty. We learned each other's domestic rhythms. The way I liked to work in silence in the early mornings, the way he hummed off-key when he cooked. These were the small, mundane bricks with which we were building our life, each one laid with care and intention. There were conversations, of course, long, quiet talks in the middle of the night, where he would unravel his fears and I would share my long-held hopes. He spoke of the disorienting feeling of his own identity shifting, of recalibrating a future he had always taken for granted. I spoke of the decade of quiet longing, of the discipline it took to be his friend when I wanted so much more. We were mapping out our histories for each other, showing the secret, hidden parts of our internal landscapes. It was a process of gentle excavation, of revealing the tender, vulnerable layers of ourselves with a newfound trust. We learned that true intimacy was not just about physical closeness, but about the profound bravery of being fully known. One Saturday, we went back to his old apartment to pack the last of his things. The space was mostly empty now, echoing and impersonal. As we taped up the final box, he paused and looked around the empty living room. I watched him, giving him the space to feel whatever he needed to feel. I expected to see sadness or nostalgia. Instead, when he turned to me, his expression was one of serene closure. "It's just a room," he said, more to himself than to me. And I understood. A home is not the walls that surround you, but the person you share the space with. His old life was now just an empty room, a place he had once been. It no longer held any power over him. That night, as we lay in bed, my bed, which was now our bed, he turned to me in the darkness. The bedroom door was closed. Securely, he traced the line of my collarbone with his finger, a familiar, comforting gesture. "Do you ever miss it?" he whispered. "The quiet? Before I came and turned your whole life upside down." I thought about it for a moment. I thought about my solitary life, my ordered and predictable world, the quiet safety of my hidden room. It had been safe, yes, but it had also been lonely. "My life wasn't quiet," I answered, my voice soft in the darkness. "It was just silent. There's a difference. It was full of the noise of unspoken things. With you, it's quiet. It's a peaceful quiet, the kind you can actually rest in." He laced his fingers through mine, his hand warm and solid in the cool air of the room. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. We had finally learned that the most important things are not always spoken aloud. They are felt in the shared silence, in the steady presence of another person breathing beside you in the dark. They are built, slowly and carefully, in the space between two people who have finally, after a long and difficult journey, found their way home. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together.